living a life that isn't yours. You feel it, don't you? That subtle, persistent hum beneath the surface of your perfectly curated life. You wake up, you follow the script, you hit your marks, deliver what's expected. But deep down, there's this quiet, unsettling emptiness. No promotion, no new car, no perfect vacation can quite fill it. It's that gnawing feeling that you're playing a role in a play written by someone who never truly knew you. You might have done everything right, studied hard, climbed the ladder, chased stability, followed the path your family applauded, the one society celebrates. But none of it feels enough. Why? Because this isn't your story. It was handed to you, disguised as responsibility, practicality, normalcy. The truth? You've been living an eidetic version of yourself. And the worst part? You've grown accustomed to it. You've mastered the art of the perfect smile for photos. You repeat the right phrases to maintain the facade. But inside, the chaos just keeps building. Carl Jung called this the betrayal of the self. When you silence your true impulses, when you ignore your dreams, when you reject your deepest intuitions, you are betraying the most authentic part of who you are. And this betrayal carries a heavy price, unexplained anxiety, a feeling of stagnation, a constant discomfort with your own existence. It's your unconscious trying to scream while you desperately try to keep everything under control. Jung said the soul sends signals, vivid dreams, persistent desires, wills that stubbornly resurface. Ignoring these signals is like hitting the snooze button on a fire alarm, pretending everything's fine while your whole life is slowly catching fire. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. The one rule Jung considered essential for anyone seeking wholeness. Stop trying to live a story that isn't yours. This isn't just feel-good self-help advice. It's a bombshell. Because it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. A significant part of your life might be built on external expectations. And the more you try to fit in, the more you fragment inside. Paulo Coelho, in his timeless novel The Alchemist, understood this perfectly. What seems like a simple fable is, in fact, a profound psychological treatise disguised as a story. Santiago, the young shepherd, is a mirror image of where you might be right now. He too started on a path that made sense to others. A safe, predictable life without big risks. Until the dreams began to disturb him, repetitive, insistent, as if his unconscious was nudging him towards something he couldn't yet grasp. And if you're honest with yourself, you're having these dreams too. Perhaps not while you sleep, but while you live. They manifest as existential fatigue, as that sudden urge to drop everything, as that question echoing in the silence. What if my life could be different? This video is for you if you feel like you're playing the wrong role. If you're tired of pretending, if you know deep down, a truer life is waiting, but you just don't know how to find it. Here, we will decode the deep psychology behind The Alchemist, showing how each character is a living archetype of the individuation journey Jung described, and guide you through this process. It's not easy, but it is absolutely necessary. The journey back home. Not the home where you live, but the home that exists within you. The only place where you can finally be who you truly are. From this moment on, the question lingers. Will you continue playing the role assigned to you? Or will you summon the courage to write your own story? The unlived life, Jung's ultimate challenge. Carl Gustav Jung didn't believe in ready-made formulas. He understood the human psyche was far too complex for simple labels or quick fixes. But among all his teachings, one truth resonated with almost relentless clarity. The greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of the parents. This single phrase echoes like a silent earthquake for anyone who grew up trying to please, adapt, and belong. Jung's only rule, and perhaps life's greatest challenge is this, is stop trying to live a story that isn't yours. But what does that really mean, practically speaking? It means every time you act to meet an external expectation, you drift a little further from your authentic self. It means every decision made out of fear. Fear of displeasing, of rejection, or of appearing irrational, fragments you internally. When you force your soul to follow a script that didn't emerge from your own unconscious, you declare war on yourself. And sooner or later, that war will demand its toll. Through his deep dives into alchemy and dreams, Jung discovered that every human being carries a unique script of individuation within them, a symbolic path leading from the J-personing, our social mask, to the Qing self, the total essence of our being. But this path isn't comfortable. It demands ruptures. It requires letting go of everything false to begin building something true. And the first step in this process is daring to listen to what's inside. What bothers you? What do you try to ignore? What attracts you, even if it seems unreasonable? All of this, these are clues. These are internal maps. These are signs of your own story trying to emerge. Most people live like emotional puppets. They react, repeat, obey, without ever truly asking themselves, "This what I truly want?" Tragic part is, we often confuse security with truth. We accept an empty career because it pays well. We cling to relationships out of fear of being alone. We endure suffocating routines in the name of a stability that, deep down, is just fear, disguised as maturity. But Jung warned us, the worst prison is the one built with bricks of comfort. That's why his rule is so simple and so devastating. Observe when you are living a story that isn't yours. This doesn't mean you should abandon everything tomorrow. It means you need to start paying attention. Really paying attention. Start questioning the roles you're playing. Observe the moments you stay silent when you wanted to scream. The places where you feel utterly out of place, even while smiling. The decisions you made that, deep down, were never truly yours. This rule isn't about external revolution. It's about internal revolution. It's about reclaiming your original narrative. The one that existed before the scars, before the traumas, before the conditioning. Because if you don't, you'll simply remain a character in someone else's life theater. And the worst part, no one will notice. Everyone will applaud. They'll say you did everything right. But only you will know you're dying inside. Jung knew that this call doesn't come as a loud voice. It arrives as discomfort, as dissatisfaction, as that feeling that something is profoundly missing, even when, theoretically, you have everything. And it's precisely there that the true inner work begins. Now, imagine if there were a mirror that showed you exactly this. How much of your life is real, and how much is just theater? And what if that mirror were a book? And what if that book were we, the Alchemist? In the next part, we're going to dive deep into this work that seems so simple at first glance, but which, under the lens of deep psychology, reveals itself as a true laboratory of inner transformation. If this content is resonating with you, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps this channel bring more of these vital conversations to light. Thank you. The Alchemist, a Jungian map to your soul. The Alchemist is a Jungian treatise disguised as a spiritual novel. That's precisely why it has touched millions worldwide. Not because it teaches, but because it reveals. It acts as a symbolic mirror where each reader, in their own unique way, sees their soul reflect. Santiago is the embodiment of the modern individual. He lives an apparently peaceful life. Stability, routine, a defined path. He's a shepherd, knows his sheep, understands the rhythm of the seasons. Yet, despite it all, something disturbs him. A recurring dream, a vision that insists on returning. Jung taught us that recurring dreams aren't mere nightly repetitions. They are urgent messages from the unconscious, trying to breach the walls of the rational mind. It's the self, the totality of the psyche, calling the ego to embark on a journey of transformation. The treasure Santiago seeks isn't really beneath the sands of Egypt. It's within him. But for him to realize this, he must cross real and symbolic deserts. And therein lies the power of the book. Each step of Santiago's journey is an archetypal representation of our own internal stages. When he leaves everything behind, he isn't just abandoning his flock. He's renouncing the yeka personae, the social mask, the inherited identity. When he follows the signs, even without fully understanding, he's accepting the movement of the unconscious. He's surrendering to the journey of individuation. The book becomes a psychological mirror because it doesn't offer ready-made answers. It presents symbols. It presents characters that function as psychic aspects. And most impressively, each reader will identify with a different part of the story. Some will see themselves at the beginning, full of doubts and attachments. Others will recognize themselves in moments of blind faith, when everything seems to be crumbling. And there are those who, in the end, realize with crystalline clarity that the treasure they sought has always been exactly where they started. But without the journey, they would never have had the eyes to see it. Jung said that what irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In the Alchemist, what touches us deeply is precisely this. The parts of the book that move us most are those that expose our own wounds, our blockages, our buried desires. The book is like a magnifying lens for the soul. It doesn't tell you what to do. It shows you who you are. This narrative structure isn't random. It follows the stages of alchemy Jung described in AP Psychology and Alchemy, the symbolic process of the soul's transformation. Santiago goes through nigredo, the initial darkness of doubt, loss, and disorientation. Then the albedo, when he begins to see more clearly what truly matters. And finally, rubido, the integration of the inner gold, the encounter with the treasure, which is, in fact, the discovery of himself. But to fully grasp this process, we need to analyze the characters Santiago meets along the way. Because each of them represents a psychological choice, a potential destiny, an archetypal mirror, revealing what happens when someone listens to or ignores the call of the self. In the next part, we'll dive into these characters. We'll understand what they truly represent. The archetypes, your inner cast of characters. Every character Santiago encounters in the Alchemist isn't there by chance. They're not just supporting roles in a heroic journey. They are symbolic representations of psychic forces that reside within all of us. Paulo Coelho crafted a narrative where each encounter presents an archetypal dilemma. Jung would call these confrontations with the unconscious, moments when the ego is challenged to choose between remaining in the known or plunging into the unknown toward the self. Here, fiction proves to be psychologically precise. The first major encounter is with the king of Salem, Melchizedek. He appears as the awakener, the one who names Santiago's restlessness and imbues it with meaning. In Jungian terms, he is the archetype of the mentor, the manifestation of ancestral wisdom residing in the collective unconscious. Jung saw figures like this as agents of the self, emerging in a person's life precisely when the internal call becomes too unbearable to ignore. Melchizedek offers the young shepherd a choice: continue living his inherited story, or follow the path of his own personal legend. We all encounter this mentor at some point, sometimes in a book, a therapist, an unexpected event. But not everyone has the courage to listen. Later, Santiago meets the Englishman, the scholar obsessed with alchemical books. He represents the type who seeks knowledge but not transformation. He wants the formula, the theory, the method, but he doesn't want to relinquish control. He's the symbol of the intellectual who takes refuge in the mind to avoid the pain of inner diving. Jung said one of the greatest dangers on the psychological path is intellectual inflation, believing that in knowing something is the same as living it. The Englishman wants the philosopher's stone, but fears the fire of transformation. If you've ever felt you know everything about change, but can't quite change, perhaps this character is your mirror. The crystal merchant is even more subtle, and perhaps more dangerous. He represents the archetype of the conformist, the one who heard the call, but chose to ignore it. He openly talks about his dreams of a pilgrimage to Mecca, but he never leaves his shop. He prefers to keep the dream alive as an idea, rather than risk seeing it shattered in reality. This is the portrait of millions who feed future fantasies to numb the pain of a stagnant existence. Jung would say this is the ego refusing to die, clinging to the comfort zone even when it suffocates the soul. What's worse, this character isn't a villain. He's likable, human, real, because he's within us, always trying to convince us it's not the right time, not worth the risk, better to leave it for later. Then emerges the alchemist, the most mysterious and powerful of guides. He doesn't explain, he provokes. He doesn't answer, he silences. He represents the integrated self, the one who has already traveled the journey and now guides others. In symbolic terms, he is the highest aspect of the psyche, one who understands the processes of death and rebirth, who knows that true gold is not material, but spiritual. The alchemist knows that to transform lead into gold, one must accept the fire. And that fire, in Jung's language, is the confrontation with the shadow, with pain, with the loss of the ego. These characters aren't just literary figures. They are internal possibilities. You've been the shepherd, you've been the merchant, you've tried to be the alchemist before your time, and perhaps you are now standing before the mentor, receiving the call to finally follow your own journey. This is how the Alchemist works. It doesn't tell you who you are. It shows you who you can be, depending on the choices you make in front of each archetype. But none of these choices are simple, because before finding any treasure, one must go through trials, obstacles, failures, injustices. And these events, which often feel like punishments, are actually the alchemical process of ego destruction. In the next part, we will dive into this powerful, uncomfortable process. The fire, embracing the death of the false self. Every true transformation begins with a death. Not a physical death, but a symbolic one. The death of the false identity, the social persona, the roles you learn to play to be accepted. Carl Jung called this stage mortification, the beginning of the alchemical process of individuation. It's when the ego, inflated with certainties and defenses, begins to crumble. And it hurts. It hurts because you start to realize you built your life on structures that now feel fragile, empty, soulless. And this is exactly what happens to Santiago throughout his journey. When he leaves his hometown, he's not just crossing geographies. He's crossing an internal boundary between the known and the unknown, the ego and the unconscious. And the first thing he encounters? Loss. Early on, he's robbed, left without money, alone, disoriented. This is the first collapse, the fall of the illusion of control. Is the universe saying, you want the truth? Then you'll have to give up your sense of security. Jung knew this moment was inevitable. The soul demands authenticity, and there's no room for that while you're trying to keep everything orderly, everything right, everything under control. Every obstacle Santiago faces is, in truth, an initiatory ritual. When he carries glass up the hill, when he faces disappointment, when he's misunderstood, he's being purified. Because you don't find a treasure with hands dirty from fear. You don't reach fulfillment carrying weights that aren't yours. The alchemical journey is violent with the ego, but compassionate with the soul. It tears you away from the lies you told to survive, only to return you to the life you were born to live. This symbolic death can also come in the form of failures, disappointments, illnesses, or unexpected ruptures. Jung said that the unconscious, when ignored, manifests through symptoms. It paralyzes you, sabotages you, makes you ill, not out of malice, but out of mercy, because it knows that pain is sometimes the only way to make us listen. And when you start to look at these pains not as punishments, but as messengers, something shifts. The desert ceases to be a place of suffering and becomes a temple. Loneliness stops being torment and becomes an opportunity for deep listening. The fall is no longer humiliation but preparation. Santiago understands this when, in the middle of the desert, he's forced to trust the invisible. When the external world stops providing guarantees, he's compelled to develop internal listening. And this is profoundly Jungian. True wisdom doesn't come from outside. It comes from contact with the self, that greatest psychic instance that views you, but lives within you. It's the inner alchemist who guides, instructs, transforms, but it only appears when the ego quiets down, when the mask falls, when the resistance surrenders. Mortification is the beginning of the alchemical process, but it is not the end. After destruction comes reconstruction. After darkness, clarity. Jung called this galbado, the stage in which the soul begins to purify, intuition sharpens, and the new begins to be born. But before getting there, you need to endure the collapse. Don't flee from it. Don't anesthetize it. Don't run back to the old story. Because if you escape the pain, you escape the transformation. And worse, you'll remain trapped in a life that doesn't belong to you. In Santiago's case, it's only after these sufferings that he begins to see the signs more clearly. The synchronicities intensify, his intuition strengthens, and he starts to trust himself more and external structures less. This is the harbinger that the gold is near. Not literal gold, but the essence, the wholeness, the self. In the next part, we will explore what these signs truly mean. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The whispers, dreams, omens, and synchronicity. Carl Jung dedicated a large part of his life to the study of dreams. For him, dreams weren't just random manifestations of the mind. They were letters written by the unconscious, symbolic messages pointing to directions the ego hadn't yet had the courage to consider. Recurring dreams in particular persist because something within us is insisting to be heard. They don't go away because the call hasn't been answered. And that's precisely what happened to Santiago in the Alchemist. The young shepherd repeatedly dreams of a treasure hidden in the pyramids of Egypt. At first glance, it seems just a daydream, but symbolically, this dream is an archetypal map. The treasure represents the self, the deepest core of the psyche, what you truly are but haven't yet accessed. The pyramids, in turn, symbolize ancestry, hidden wisdom, the eternal. The fact that the dream repeats indicates that a part of Santiago, his truest part, won't rest until he follows this call. Jung said the unconscious communicates with us all the time, not just when we sleep. It also manifests through sudden intuitions, desires we can't explain, restlessness that insists on returning. You feel an absurd urge to change cities, end a relationship, start something new. Everything seems irrational. But the force of this impulse is so great that, even without evidence, you feel you must obey. This is the self trying to take the reins, not because the ego has failed, but because it's time for something greater to be born. In the Alchemist, Santiago learns to follow the omens, the signs, and Paulo Coelho here strikes at the heart of archetypal psychology. These signs aren't magical in a cheap mystical sense. They are synchronicities, as Jung called them, meaningful coincidences that occur in the external world and mirror what's happening within you. When your soul aligns with your purpose, the external world begins to respond symbolically. People appear at the right moment. Unexpected opportunities arise. Obstacles become revelations. Even without rational understanding, you may feel, I am on the right path. But to see these signs, you must first silence the noise of the ego. You need to step out of automatic mode, set aside the constant need for control, and allow yourself to feel, listen, observe. Santiago only begins to understand the language of the world when he accepts that there's a greater intelligence acting through him. And this has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with psychic openness, with the willingness to trust that there's something within you that knows where you need to go, even if you don't yet know how to get there. How many times have you had an impossible dream and tried to bury it? How many times have you felt an inexplicable desire for something and immediately dismissed it as nonsense? What you don't realize is that by doing this, you are rejecting your own inner guide. And that's why life begins to seem directionless, because you ignored the map. And the unconscious, tired of being silenced, begins to scream in the form of anxiety, dissatisfaction, apathy, psychosomatic illnesses. Jung believed that the greatest mistake of modern humanity was the arrogance of thinking we could ignore our inner life without consequences. He said that sooner or later, the unconscious demands its price, and it's high. It comes in the form of existential crises, emotional collapses, feelings of emptiness. But all of this isn't punishment. It's an invitation. It's the insistent call for you to stop living a programmed life and start living an authentic life. Santiago only finds his treasure because he decides to honor what he feels, even when everything seems absurd. He follows the signs, even when he has no guarantees. He chooses intuition, even when it challenges logic. And that's what separates those who awaken from those who remain asleep. In the next part, we will reach the climax of this journey, the moment when the treasure is finally revealed. But not as we expected. The treasure, finding yourself where you started. When Santiago finally arrives at the pyramids, exhausted, transformed, hoping to dig and find gold, he doesn't find what he imagined. He's beaten by thieves, humiliated, reduced to nothing. Everything seems to have been in vain. But there, at that point of total breakdown, he receives the revelation. The treasure he was seeking was always buried where it all began, beneath the abandoned church where he had his first dream. The message, at first glance, seems cruel. How so? All the pain, all the journey, all the suffering, only to discover that what he was looking for was always there. But that is where the deepest secret of the Alchemist lies, and the exact point where Jung's psychology finds its maximum expression. The treasure wasn't there at the beginning. It only came to exist because Santiago went to the end of the journey. It was the crossing, the desert, the failures, the losses, the encounters with archetypes. It was all of this that transformed him. The gold was never the goal. The gold was Jungian. The true alchemical process isn't about finding something outside. It's about becoming what you truly are, inside. Carl Jung said, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Santiago dreamed, looking outside, but he only awakened when he understood that the journey was internal. The treasure is not literal, it is symbolic. It is the state of consciousness achieved by those who have the courage to face their shadow, renounce external expectations, die symbolically, and be reborn, more authentic, more whole, more alive, more alive. Perhaps you are waiting for recognition, love, or meaning in places that can never offer you that. What if everything you've lived up to now, the pains, the frustrations, the repeated cycles, weren't punishments, but invitations? Invitations to your individuation journey. Invitations to stop living the story that was written for you, and finally take authorship of your own narrative. There are no shortcuts to these. There is no ready-made map. Each human being carries a unique psychic configuration, That's why the Alchemist touches so many people in different ways, because it doesn't give you answers. It returns the essential question to your shield. Who would you be if you stop pretending? Guardian, you will need to cross the desert of your soul. You will need to face your conditioning, your masks, your fears in the face of life's challenges. You will have to listen to what you spent years trying to silence. You will have to die to who you thought you should be, and be reborn as who you always were. And this starts now with a choice. The choice to no longer ignore the discomfort, to no longer trivialize your dreams, to no longer accept the comfortable lie of a life that keeps you trapped. You are standing in front of a door, and on the other side of it, there is your own story. But no one will cross it for you. If this video made you reflect in some way, if it touched something you perhaps didn't even know was inside you, write in the comments, "I am ready to live my story." Because by writing this, you're not speaking to me. You're speaking to yourself. Keep watching the next video. It is important, because this journey doesn't end with an answer, but continues with a new question. See you there.